So hello and welcome everyone to this MSSO webinar, Data Analysis and Query Building with MedDRA. My name is Suzanne Insur Shaker or Shaker, both pronunciations are correct. I'll be your instructor for today. Joining me is my colleague, Hannah Eaton, who is an MSSO training coordinator. Hannah will kindly be facilitating our discussion today, and she's gone over a few reminders on where to post your questions in the chat feature of the GoToWebinar. So if you have questions as we go through the slides, please feel free to post them there, and Hannah will be monitoring the chat, and she can bring them to my attention as needed or in between major sections. And we can also try to leave time for Q&A at the end. So a few introductions. I am a medical officer with the MedDRA MSSO. I'm based in New Jersey on the East Coast of the United States. Prior to joining the MSSO, I've had about 20 years experience in the industry, mainly in the world of clinical research within different functional groups. This particular webinar has a few polls, not a lot of interactive coding exercises because it's not focused on coding, but we do have a few polls. So let's start off with a few introductions to get to know you a little bit better. You can access the polls either through the QR code on your screen or through the URL, and they are anonymized. So even if you put in a username, it doesn't show it at our end. It's completely anonymous. And we'll start with just a question on where are you joining us from today? And just a reminder, this webinar is scheduled for 2 hours. We'll be doing some demos of some of the MedDRA tools. I do encourage you to try them at your end as we go through them, so that if you have questions, you can post them to us, or if you try them after the webinar is done, you can reach out to our help desk at any time with any questions. We'll try to give you a 5-minute break in between the 2 hours. So hopefully, once we're done with the first hour, we'll give you a 5-minute break and resume. It's nice to see folks from different parts of the world joining us today, so thank you for making the time. I would like to see a bit more folks putting in their flags just to make sure that you're able to access the Poll EV tool. If you're having difficulty with access, their instructions to access Poll EV is also in your chat, so you can take a look there. Thank you. So maybe give folks a few more minutes. So I'm hoping that more folks will be able to participate with us interactively today. And just a reminder, the focus of this webinar is for data analysis and query building. So we will not be going into details on MedDRA, the background of MedDRA or the structure of MedDRA, nor on coding basics or advanced coding with MedDRA. If you're interested in those topics, there are webinars dedicated to those areas, and you can look up our training tab on our website under schedule, and you should see all the offerings there. So I see a few more folks able to access the Poll EV tool, but for the interest of time, I'm going to be moving forward. The second question for the Poll EV is, what are the roles or functions you perform in your organization? And you can choose as many as apply to you. You can even put some from previous lives or previous experiences. It doesn't have to be current. This also gives us an idea on where the focus of interest would be for the attendees today. Nice, this is wonderful. I see a lot of folks from pharmacovigilance. Welcome to our medical reviewers, our data analysts, our coders, our regulatory authority folks, our academians. Welcome everyone. Okay, so the primary focus would be PV for today, I think. Okay, and are you familiar with MedDRA? Do you have experience in MedDRA? And it's okay if you don't, but just so we know. Okay, so most of the folks have less than 2 years experience in MedDRA, a few that are seasoned MedDRA users. So welcome everyone, welcome everyone. Thank you for responding to the polls. Okay, so let's just start with a general slide that talks about the development of MedDRA. MedDRA belongs to the ICH. MedDRA is owned by the ICH. It is an ICH standard, and it is an M1 initiative by the ICH, meaning it's a multidisciplinary guideline. So if you like to show this every time I make a presentation, this is the MedDRA.org website. On the top right-hand corner is the icon for the ICH, and if you click on that, it does take you to the ICH website. And under the work products, under ICH guidelines, many folks are familiar with the quality guidelines, the safety guidelines, the efficacy guidelines, but there are also the multidisciplinary guidelines, and MedDRA is the first one in that list. So MedDRA is an M1 ICH guideline, and it gives you an idea of the implementation status of different regions of the world for MedDRA. So I always like to share that when I start off. Going back to the slides, so MedDRA was developed under the auspices of the ICH in the 1990s. The activities of the MSSO is overseen by the ICH MedDRA Management Committee, which in turn is composed of the ICH parties, the MHRA, Health Canada, and WHO as observer. This is our disclaimer and copyright notice slide. So the slides that you are presented with today also belong to the ICH and are copyright protected for the ICH, but they're available for you. If you're not sure where to get a copy for them, please reach out to Hannah in the chat and she'll be able to assist you. You are allowed to use these slides with the exception of MedDRA and ICH logos. However, if you make any changes to the slides, please make sure that these changes are demarcated, clearly identified and labeled, and that no impression is given that your changes were in any way endorsed by the ICH. The second bullet point is our legal disclaimer that the presentation is provided as is without warranty. The third bullet point would not apply because we don't have third-party materials in this particular webinar. So today the plan is to go over data retrieval and presentation in MedDRA by sharing with you some points listed in the Points to Consider document. We're going to discuss the applications of MedDRA in data retrieval, presentation, and analysis. We'll show the use of some of the MedDRA tools and demo some of these tools during the webinar, and then conclude with a Q&A session. So let's get started. Now, ICH did create an ICH endorsed guide for MedDRA users talking specifically to MedDRA data retrieval and presentation. We call them Points to Consider documents, or for short, PTC. And they do provide the options of use for the industry or regulatory purposes. They are best used in conjunction with the other ICH endorsed guidelines, the other PTC documents, which are for MedDRA term selection. MedDRA term selection basically means MedDRA coding, because when you are coding in MedDRA, what you are doing is you are selecting a term within MedDRA that best matches your source verbatim. Now, if you don't have your own organizational guidelines for data retrieval and presentation, we strongly recommend that you create them, but base them against these PTC documents. And I'm going to show you where to find the PTC documents. So back to the MedDRA.org website. There's two ways that you can access this document. We're going to be talking about it in more details. So it is of use to you, I think, to be able to download it and keep it for your records, either under how to use. So how to use MedDRA. If you click on support documentations, you'll see different color banners. There's banners blue and there's banners in gray, and you can select the language of choice that is easier for you or preferred to you. So I'm going to keep it at English. The blue banner are the PTC documents, the ICH endorsed documents, in addition to one that is called MedDRA Best Practices. So here is your MedDRA term selection points to consider. This one is for coding. And here is your MedDRA data retrieval and presentation, which is going to be our topic for today. And here is a companion document which has bit more details on certain areas of interest, such as medication errors. The gray banner are not ICH endorsed documents. They are MSSO documents, and they are very useful resources for you when you're using MedDRA, whether it's the introductory guide or SMQ guide or what's new with every released version. The second way you can access these documents is by a shortcut on the top of our website under PTC, so points to consider. So if I click that, it's going to take me to the same page, but with the blue banner defaulted open. So the PTC, let me just move on. The PTC documents are developed by a working group of the ICH Management Committee. They are released once a year with the March release of the MedDRA dictionary. There are complete versions in about 6 languages and condensed versions in an additional 9 languages. And like we showed you, they are available on the MedDRA website and the JMO website. JMO is the Japanese MedDRA organization, because when MedDRA was created, it was created in both languages, English and Japanese. The JMO is our sister organization tasked with maintenance of MedDRA in the Japanese language. When you look over that PTC document for data retrieval and presentation, it has a few different sections. We're going to go over the first 2 sections, going about general principles and general queries and retrieval. But the last 2 sections for standardized MedDRA queries and customized searches are outside the scope of our presentation today. However, if you are interested in them, they do have their own webinar, and we are going to be offering one in about 2 weeks. So you're welcome to register for that and join us for that as well. So let's go some of these general principles that are offered in the PTC document. And we're talking about the first one, which is the quality of source data. Everybody knows that. Everybody had that hammered in them when they first joined our field. High quality data output is highly reliant on high quality data input. When the quality of the information originally reported is maintained with consistent and appropriate term selection. So we're not just talking about the quality of the source data, but we're also talking about the quality of the coding. And of course, organizations should pursue continuous oversight of data quality. The second topic, the data conversion considerations, may not apply to everybody. So if you have legacy data that was previously coded to other terminologies such as WHOART or COSTART, and you're thinking about the method to convert this data into MedDRA, there are a couple of different options. So if you have the original verbatim from the source, you can pursue the option of converting it into MedDRA, bypassing the previous terminology, or you can choose to keep it in the previous terminology like WHOART or COSTART and convert it from there into MedDRA. Now, there's a couple of different things to keep in mind based on which method you choose to pursue. If you don't have the original source data and your hands are tied, you may not have the first option anyway. But if you do have the first option, it may end up being a better one to pursue because previous terminologies may not have been as granular as MedDRA. And when they were coded to those terminologies, you may have lost some of the specificity of the verbatim. So an example is if your reported verbatim was GI ischemia, and the previous terminology did not have that level of granularity, and it was coded to gastrointestinal disorder, if you choose that term to be converted into MedDRA, you're just going to be capturing a gastrointestinal disorder and lose the specificity. So just something to keep in mind when you're making a selection on which method to pursue. And of course, documentation is very important. So organizations are encouraged to ensure organization-specific guidelines be consistent with the ICH endorsed points to consider document, whether this is for coding and MedDRA term selection conventions, or for data retrieval and output strategies, including SMQs and other queries, and of course, quality assurance procedures. Organization-specific strategies should be consistent with the points to consider documents, and they should also include details on different topics like how you're using MedDRA versioning approach. Which MedDRA version did you use for your search? And of course, ensuring that it matches the MedDRA version you use for your coding. What are your search strategy methodologies? And detail them sufficiently so they can be reproducible. What is your versioning process? What is your process for creating and maintaining customized MedDRA queries? And of course, if you're sharing data with your other colleagues or other organization, these are the kind of information you'll be interested to receive from them as well. Okay, before we move on to a bit more details on MedDRA analysis, we will be using a lot of jargons that relate to the MedDRA hierarchy. So I just wanted to see if folks are comfortable with this jargon, or maybe we need to do a kind of a short crash course on the MedDRA hierarchy. So if you can take a look at this poll. And let me just activate it. And let me know what you think the order of the MedDRA hierarchy is. And if you don't know, that's okay. You can just pick one. Okay, I'm very happy to see this. So the order of the MedDRA hierarchy does start with the LLT. The LLT stands for lowest level term. They are the most granular in MedDRA, meaning there's the most of them. And then you have the preferred term, and then you have these grouping terms, which are the HLT, the HLGTs, and then the system organ class. So I'm very happy to see this. Okay, the next question. When you're doing data coding, which level of MedDRA do you typically code at? So when you're doing coding, which level of MedDRA do you typically use when you're coding? And I'm also happy to see that the majority have picked the LLTs. The lowest level term is the most granular. It's the most numerous. There's over 87,000. So it gives you a huge selection to pick from when you're deciding which term in MedDRA is the best match to your source verbatim that you received. So I'm very happy to see this. And then the next question. If we say that every preferred term in MedDRA is linked to at least one primary SOC and at least one secondary SOC, is this true or is this false? So every preferred term in MedDRA is linked to at least one primary SOC and at least one secondary SOC. Is this true or is this false? Okay, so the correct answer to this one is that this is false. And the reason for that is the following. Not every preferred term in MedDRA has a secondary system organ class. And about maybe 40% or so of preferred terms in MedDRA have a secondary system organ class. So there is a large number of preferred terms that only have a primary system organ class. And maybe it's easier if I give you a quick demo on what we mean by primary and secondary system organ classes, but let's do the last poll from this section before I do that. So the question is the primary system organ class allocation. When is this performed? Is this selected by the coder? Is it selected by the safety reviewer, by the regulator, or is it predefined? Okay, the majority of you do have it right, and I'm very happy to see that. The primary system organ class allocation in MedDRA is predefined. It's actually hard-coded in the ASCII files that we provide. And one of the really important notices that we always provide in our webinars is don't try to change that. Even if you can, don't try to change that, because that's what makes MedDRA standardized. Okay, let me give you a bit of kind of a quick overview. So let me go back to support documentations. Let me go back to the gray ribbon and just give you a little bit of a look into MedDRA. So this is the MedDRA hierarchy. The MedDRA hierarchy is based on 5 tiers or 5 levels. The lowest level term is the one that is most numerous, and each one is subordinate to the one that is above it. As you go higher up in the hierarchy, the number of terms drastically contract. So we have about 87,000 at the lowest level term, and then about 25 to 26,000 at the preferred term. And then we have about 1,700, 1,800 at the HLT level, the high level term, and then about 330 some at the high level group term, and then only 27 system organ classes. So right there is kind of an overview of how we do standardization, summarization, and augmentation of signals in MedDRA. As you go up in the MedDRA hierarchy, the lowest level terms, there's a lot of them. So a lot of them can be related to each other, meaning they can be either semantically equivalent or synonymous, but they mean the same concept. So you can say abdominal pain or tummy ache, or you can say epigastric pain. They all mean the same thing. So these are sister terms. One of them would be preferred to the rest to represent this single medical concept. And that one that we prefer to the rest to represent a single medical concept is copied over again at the preferred term level. So every preferred term actually has a copy of itself in the LLT term. And then as you go higher up, the preferred terms that are related are grouped together at the next level in a medically meaningful way. This could be based on anatomy or pathology or physiology or function. And then these HLT groups, about 1,700 or so, the ones that are related also get grouped together in clinically relevant ways. And then we come up with the HLGT groups, the high-level group terms. And the high-level group terms are also themselves grouped together in a meaningful way into 27 system organ classes. And these 27 system organ classes are either designated by etiology, primary site of manifestation, or by purpose. So the hierarchical structure of MedDRA was intended to facilitate data retrieval by providing grouping terms like the HLTs and the HLGTs that aggregate the very specific terms that you had used in your coding. Okay, so let's give an example from our web-based browser. So if we go into our web-based browser and see an example of primary versus secondary SOCs, and let's say I put cardio, and I just put PAD-B. Let's see what comes up. Okay, let's look at these two synonym search results. And the reason we have synonym search results, just a quick FYI, is that we have a synonym list built into MedDRA. So if you put in cardiac, cardio, heart, it doesn't matter. It's going to pull up everything that has to do with heart. So let's look at these two different terms. I have cardiac autonomic neuropathy and I have cardiac valvulopathy. So cardiac valvulopathy meaning there's something wrong with the valve. So it's a cardiac valve disease. As I expand these pluses within the search results, it's taking me to the different levels of MedDRA that we just saw. So there's my LLT that I would use for coding. There's my preferred term that I would use for reporting. And then these are my HLT and HLGT grouping terms. So the valvulopathy goes under cardiac valve disorders as an HLGT, and it resides under the cardiac disorders. I don't see any other system organ class. So this particular preferred term only links to one primary system organ class. And I know it's the primary because it has the blue box around it. What about this one? Cardiac autonomic neuropathy. If I expand it, it also has one PT. Every LLT can only link to one PT. But as I expand the PT, I'm seeing 3 different HLTs. So this particular preferred term has more than one pathway. It's linked to more than one system organ class. So let me expand what I'm looking here, and I can see that there are 4 different system organ classes, because this particular disease or this particular condition can be linked to more than one body system. It can be linked to more than one system organ class. The primary system organ class is the one in the blue box. The primary system organ class, the rule is that it's based on, usually, primary site of manifestation. So if it's a heart condition, it would be a cardiac primary system organ class. If it was a GI condition, it would be a gastrointestinal primary system organ class. This one is a cardiac condition, but it's a cardiac neuropathy. It's mainly a type of neuropathy, and neuropathies are a nervous system disorder. That's why they are in the primary system organ class of nervous system disorders. But if your particular product can affect heart conditions and you're interested in that, wouldn't you be interested in seeing it under the cardiac system organ class? Yes, you would. And that's why it has a secondary link. As a cardiac disorder, it also has a secondary link as a diabetic complication. So depending on your interest, you are able to see this particular preferred term under any of these system organ classes. But of course, MedDRA needs to be standardized. We need to be able to compare it against different providers of the same product, against different indications for the same product, against time for the same product. So there has to be standardization. So that's why a primary system organ class is hard-coded. It is predefined. It cannot be changed, but you're giving the flexibility of changing your analysis of your data by use of these secondary system organ classes. So that's kind of an overview of why we have primary and secondary system organ classes. So let's move on now and talk a little bit about the general principles. We just said MedDRA is standardized. Don't change the primary system organ class allocation, even if you are requested to do so by a client or by a medical monitor or by a safety reviewer. Don't change the structural integrity of MedDRA, because you will lose the integrity of that standard. And besides which, all your colleagues from different organizations are using the standard structure of MedDRA. The regulatory authorities are using the standardized structure of MedDRA. The additional optional views are available to you for use in your analysis, but not for presentation to the regulatory authorities. Okay, when we're talking about organization-specific data characteristics, so although MedDRA is standardized terminology, different organizations can implement it in various ways. And it's important to understand your own organization-specific approach when it comes to data characteristics and implementation strategies, as well as any data partners you're working with, any other organizations you're dealing with. So some of the questions that you want to ask yourself, do you know or do you not know? Do you know if your database structure allows the MedDRA hierarchy to be stored in all its levels and used in all its levels or not? Are you using synonyms in your coding approach or not? Which level terms are you storing when you store MedDRA data? And are you approaching the same formatting and characteristic across your different indications, different products, different groups, or does each group have a different approach? What is your approach to data conversion from other terminologies like we spoke about? What happens to your coding practices? Do they change over time? Are you keeping track of those changes or not? What are the limitations and the restrictions? So don't assume that you're able to see PTs in their secondary SOC allocations. Don't make that assumption. Test it out. Ask your IT personnel. Am I able to see HLTs and HLGTs in all pathways, or am I restricted only to the primary SOC? And then, of course, what are your term selection principles? What are your coding principles? Like we said, term selection is the same as saying coding. Does your organization allow you to select more than one MedDRA term or more than one code when you're assigning codes, or is it a one-to-one allocation? Are you only coding your diagnosis when it's listed with signs and symptoms, or are you coding everything? How does that impact your counts at the end. Other general principles is the impact of MedDRA's characteristics or grouping terms. So we just saw that HLTs and HLGTs are available to you in the MedDRA hierarchy. They can be very useful tools when you're doing your data analysis and data retrieval because they are already aggregating terms. They are already collecting terms that are similar or related together in a group. So it's already being done for you. So, for example, let's say you're looking at cardiac arrhythmias, you're interested in supraventricular tachycardias. Are you going to look throughout the entirety of the cardiac disorder system organ class for that? Or is there a level in MedDRA that helps you focus your attention on a particular group? So under cardiac disorders, you're going to see the high-level group term for cardiac arrhythmias. But that can also be broken down further into the type of arrhythmia. So if you're interested only in supraventricular arrhythmias, there's an HLT for that. Okay, other principles about grouping terms. Clinically related PTs might be overlooked or not recognized as belonging together if you're not expanding your view. So because similar terms may be located in more than one HLT within the same SOC or even in different system organ classes. So for example, if you're interested in Stevens-Johnson syndrome, if that's something of interest to you, it's a Bullis condition. It's under the high-level term, that grouping term of Bullis conditions. But if you don't include in your search exfoliative conditions like dermatitis exfoliative under that HLT exfoliative conditions, you might be underestimating this particular incidence. You might be underestimating the possible counts of these related terms. Conversely, in the investigation SOC, we see something a little bit different. The investigation SOC is one of 3 system organ classes we have in MedDRA that are called uniaxial. Uniaxial meaning that the preferred terms that are listed in these 3 system organ classes are not linked anywhere else. And when you think about them, as I explained, it's going to make a bit more sense. Investigations can be related to a multitude of diseases. So it's going to be near impossible to link every single investigation to the system organ class that it might be linked to. So that's just not going to be possible. The same for the surgeries. Surgeries can be done for a multitude of different conditions. So it's also very challenging to link a surgery to all the related system organ classes that it can pertain to. But also, you have investigations that relate to normal findings, or the fact that you just did a procedure, you just completed an investigation, you want to be able to code that. You did a blood pressure monitor. You didn't get the result, but you did the investigation. So the investigation SOCs allow you to do that, but it ends up collecting terms together in a single HLT that may not all be relevant to your specific area of interest. So for example, under the HLT vascular tests, not elsewhere classified, including blood pressure, we see both preferred terms for blood pressure increased as well as blood pressure decreased. So if you just grab a high-level term from the investigation system organ class, it's going to give you these conflicting results. If you're interested in both of them, that's fine. If you're only interested in one of them, then you have to be very careful that you're not crowding your search or your query with non-relevant terms. Okay, let's talk about multi-axiality. So we just showed that example with the cardiac neuropathy, right? That the same preferred term may exist or may be linked to more than one system organ class. This allows the terms to be grouped in different but medically appropriate ways, either by etiology or by organ system. And we said that the primary rule is that usually the link is based on the primary site of manifestation. There's 3 main system organ classes that are an exception to that rule. And when you think about aggregating for really significant safety risks or safety signals, it will make sense. These three are the congenital disorders, the cancers, and the infections. So congenital disorders and the neoplasms and the infections are the exception to the rule of allocation by primary site of manifestation. We need to bear in mind that the frequencies of medical conditions may be impacted depending on where the preferred term is linked. So again, going back to that cardiac neuropathy. The cardiac neuropathy, because it's a type of neuropathy, was linked primarily to the nervous system disorder. But if you're interested for your particular product, if you're interested in cardiac disorders and you just look at the primary system organ class, you're going to miss that from the cardiac disorder SOG, unless you look at the secondary links. So that's what we're going to give examples as we progress. So the related preferred terms may exist in system organ classes other than the one that directly jumps at you when you think about your area of interest. So for example, if you're interested in kidney disorders, of course, there's a system organ class for renal and urinary disorders, and that would be an easy place to get started. But don't forget those 3 uniaxial system organ classes, because there could be lab test results associated with renal disease that are of huge interest to you when you're talking about kidney disorders. There could be surgeries or procedures done to these subjects that can indicate they had something going on with the renal system, like a renal transplant, and there could be social circumstances. Social circumstances is the 3rd system organ class that's uniaxial. And why is it uniaxial? Well, just like investigations and just like surgeries, social circumstances, if you think of them as risk factors, they can be related to a multitude of diseases. So, for example, if a patient is a smoker, or if they use a wheelchair, or if they have an issue with mobility, or if they are on a certain type of diet, these can all be risk factors that are related to a multitude of different diseases. So you can't possibly link them to every possible one, but they are there for you. So don't forget to look through these social circumstances. You will find terms in there that could be of relevance to your area of interest when you're building your query. Okay, so when you are looking at your first step in identifying areas of interest, how are you looking at your data? The easiest way, the most direct way, is to present your data by primary system organ class. And that is what's expected. So typically, when you are presenting data, when you're analyzing data, you are sorting it by primary system organ class and then by preferred term. Your secondary system organ class is really, really important, but it's used for alternate views and presentations. It's not typically how you're going to present it to your regulators. You're going to use it to identify any signals when you're looking at your data, but your presentation is going to be by primary SOC. Now, I'm going to show you an exercise on how we're going to start looking at the different levels of MedDRA when we're trying to identify signals or clusters in our data. So this is an example of an output. Let's say that you have these particular patients in your study, and you notice that just by looking at the primary system organ class, you took a quick look at the output, and you notice that in the investigation system organ class, you had a higher significant incidence of reports compared to your placebo. So you listed all the PTs in the system organ class and started looking at them. And you're not sure if you're seeing a signal here or not. You notice that the ASTs is elevated, the ALTs are elevated, the GGTs are elevated, but is this a cluster or is this not a cluster? And you move on and you see a bit more types of investigation outputs, and you're not sure what to focus your attention on. Well, if you go back and ask your programmer, can you give me this information, but also show me those grouping terms? Show me the HLTs and the HLGTs. Here's an example of how you can start seeing these clusters by using these grouping terms. This is the same set of data, the same system organ class, but this time, instead of looking at it by preferred term, you're looking at it by the high level term, which is the next one up from the preferred term. So you're looking at it by the high level term. And right away, you can see a clearer cluster. You can see a clearer cluster under the liver. Oh, sorry, let me go back. Under the liver function analysis, telling you that there is something going on here. Maybe you want to take a closer look. You may even want to start investigating the next one down, the tissue enzyme, the digestives, the white blood cells, but definitely there is a cluster for liver function. So compared to just looking at the PTs versus at the HLTs or the HLGTs, your view may be a bit clearer. Okay, other principles that are discussed in the PTC document is MedDRA versioning. So MedDRA is updated twice a year. We have two kinds of releases. We have the March release, which is also called the complex release because it allows for changes on all levels of MedDRA. And then we have a September release, which is the 0.1 release. Only the LLT and PT levels are allowed to be changed for that release. So it's called the simple release. And of course, the version that is used in data retrieval and presentation should be documented. So when you're building a query, you should document which MedDRA version you used, and it absolutely must match the version that you used in your coding. If you don't match the version used in coding to the version you used in analyzing the coding, you're going to get a lot of skewed results. So that's very important. Of course, the MSSO does provide resources to you to help you in your versioning review and versioning decisions. So in that gray banner that I showed you under the documents, there's something called a What's New document. It details every changes in every release of MedDRA. Also in your release packet, we provide you with a version report that details all the changes between the two versions of MedDRA. And we allow you the use of something called an MVAT tool, a MedDRA version analysis tool. It's available to everybody in your organization who has access to MedDRA. It is free of charge and it's really very helpful. And we're going to do a demo in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about an example of the impact of versioning on your data when you're reviewing your data. So in MedDRA version 22.1, there were two separate preferred terms, one for pelvic fracture and one for fractured ischium. And a user submitted a request to us and said that, I don't think this is correct. So the end user suggested that the ischium is part of the pelvic. So why is it a separate preferred term? And the user was absolutely correct. So the medical team did the review and they made the decision that the fractured ischium is in fact part of the pelvic. So it was demoted to an LLT level from a preferred term and subsumed under the pelvic fracture. Now, if you had data that was previously coded to 22.1 when these were separate, and you had 15 cases which had a fractured ischium, and then you ran your data again in version 23, and they all disappeared, but now you see 20 cases under pelvic fracture, you might be a little bit concerned saying, why am I seeing all these cases of pelvic fracture? But they're not new cases of pelvic fracture. These are the 15 ischium fracture that were previously reported that are now subsumed under that PT. So that's why it's really important to understand what every release of MedDRA, every version release of MedDRA could have in terms of impact to your data. Here's another example. The version 22.1 had a preferred term of vascular cognitive impairment listed under the psychiatric disorders. And also an end user suggested to us that that was not the correct pathway, that this in fact was a nervous system disorder. And the medical team reviewed that request and agreed with it. And so in 23, this preferred term had a change in the hierarchy. It was no longer primary to the psychiatric disorder. It was now secondary to psychiatric disorder and primary to nervous system disorder. So when you look at it in version 23 and you're only looking at your primary system organ class and you see that all those 20 cases disappeared, you might be tempted to think, was it spontaneously resolved? Are these all gone? Well, no, they're not gone, but they're under a different primary system organ class now. So they're under nervous system. So just kind of to show you the vascular cognitive impairment, what that looks like. So let me restore defaults. And it's vascular cognitive impairment. If I right-click on it, just to show you the history, I can open the history and just show you a little bit of how the change happened. So in version 17, here's my vascular cognitive impairment. The system organ class with the blue box was the psychiatric disorder. I have the same 3 system organ classes in version 23, but now my primary link is to the nervous system disorder. So I didn't lose the fact that they were linked to these other 2, but now it's my primary site of manifestation has been corrected that this is a nervous system disorder. Okay, so how do we use this tool and where is it? So the MedDRA version analysis tool is available on our website. It is free to all users. It allows you the ability to use it in 3 different features. You can run it to compare any 2 versions of MedDRA. You don't have to be consecutive versions of MedDRA. So you can run it to compare any 2 versions of MedDRA and then export that report. You can import your own data into the tool and run it to identify what impact a different version of MedDRA has on your data. Of course, you need to know what version of MedDRA your data was coded to, and you need to import your data either in the LLT or the PT level. The tool is not going to save your data. So if you forget to export your report, you need to run it again. And you can run it to search a single term change, identify kind of like the history which I showed you on the WBB, but identify the search term change on a single term. The tool itself allows you to change the interface language to whatever language you're comfortable in. It also allows you to run reports on supplemental changes. Supplemental terms are those that have been reviewed by the medical monitors, the medical team at the MSSO. They have been approved for addition into MedDRA for the next version to be released. So they're not yet released, but they are available to you as supplemental data. You can run your data on supplemental changes in preparation for what's coming in the future, and you can run it to show you any secondary system organ class changes. And we do have a very nice video cast available to you. Let me show you where before we do the demo of the tool. So let me go back to our website, meddra.org. Here's our home page. And under training, there's some training materials that are available to you without a username or password. You can just access them directly on the website. Under tools, if you scroll down a little bit, there's the MedDRA version analysis. There's the MVAD demo, and it's in 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. You can start playing it, you can stop it, you can experiment with the tool hands-on, then go back and refresh the video if you like. It's really very well prepared. Okay, now let me show you where to find the tool. But before we do the demo, let me just stop a little bit here and ask Hannah. Hannah, I've been talking for a long time. Are there any questions?
I am not seeing any questions in the chat so far. If any questions come up, please feel free to send them in the GoToWebinar control panel chat pane.
Thanks, Hannah. Okay, so let me show you the tool. We'll do a demo of the tool, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. All right, so there's one of the really nice tabs for you to explore on the meddra.org website is the How to Use, because the How to Use walks you through how to use MedDRA. There's your support documentations, like we said. There's your change requests. So if you have any thoughts about, I saw something in MedDRA, I don't agree with the placement, like that, those vascular disorders that we talked about that ended up moving to the nervous system. Or if you think that a preferred term should not be a preferred term, it should be an LLT, like that fractured ischium, you can submit a change request to the MSSO, and they do review every single change request. The How to Use tab also walks you through the tools. So if you click on tools, these are all the MedDRA tools. They're all available to you as MedDRA subscribers. And our tool for today is the MVAT. So if I click on MVAT, there's going to be a short description of what the MVAT does, a link to the training materials, so I can go back and access the video cast again from that link, or I can open up the tool, and I can open up the tool from two places, either here on the right hand side where it says open the MVAT, or the link here within the paragraph that is linked to the tool. So let me open up the MVAT. The training credentials that are available to you in the chat feature will allow you to access the tool. So if you want to try your hand while we're going through it and test it out on your end, feel free to do so. Send me any questions you come across if you have any, or if you try it afterwards and then run into issues, please reach out to our help desk. They are very knowledgeable and very happy to help you. So when I log into the tool, this is what I see on my landing page. I can change my preferred language. If I'm more comfortable with French as my interface language, I can change it. I can keep it as English. I can keep it on release files or supplemental. Like we said, supplemental is what's coming. If I do supplemental, everything changes into pink. Let me keep it release files. And I can pick whatever language MedDRA files I have. So if I'm using the French MedDRA language itself, my MedDRA files in French, I can run the tool on the French MedDRA, and I can pick whatever versions I'm interested in. So the tool will default to the most recent as the ending version, and the one before that as the starting version. And of course, it makes sense. Your starting version has to be older than your ending version. So if I'm interested in what changed between 26.1 and 27, I can keep it as is. If I'm interested in 26 versus 27, I can change it. If I want to see the secondary SOC information, I can click on it. And if I'm only interested in only one system organ class, if every single one of my products only has outputs or events on the eye disorder because it's topical and that's the only thing that I'm interested in, I can restrict it to eye. If there's eye and infection, I can, eye with the control and infection, I can do 2 system organ classes, 3 or 4. I can clear my selection and run it across all of them. So let me just show you an example between 26.1 and 27 and run the version report. When I run the version report, it's really checking against the entirety of the MedDRA file. So it takes a little bit of time to give me the output, but then it's going to give me the output on the bottom in my screen, as you can see now. And it's going to give me the blue box explaining what each of these reports are. Some of them are self-explanatory. So the first one says new LLTs, including new PTs. So we said some LLTs are preferred to the rest. So some of them become PTs. So this is basically all of them. Or if I'm just interested in new PTs, here are my new PTs. I can click on View Detail. And when I click on View Detail, it kind of expands with all the information. It gives me all 259 new PTs that were added in 27. Or if I'm interested in, well, which were promoted. Promotions are LLTs that were in a previous version, and now they are promoted to PTs. So if I want to see those 15, it's going to tell me which one was promoted LLT, what the 26.1 PT code at that time was that it's linked to, and now, of course, it's promoted, so I know it's a PT and which system organ class now it's linked to, and so on and so forth. So it gives you all the details. Well, can I have it in Excel? Yes, you can have it in Excel. You can export it, and if you want to choose to export all of it, you can either default all, or if you don't want all of them and you want to specify, for example, I want the new PTs and the promotions and demotions and maybe currency changes. Currency changes are really, really important. I want to show you these because currency changes either mean that there was an LLT in 26.1 that is now non-current. You can't use it anymore when you're coding, or it was non-current and it's activated again to become current, But if any of these 10 LLTs from 26.1 was an LLT that you had used in your own coding, then you have to be very careful that you go back and check these terms, because now you can't use it anymore. It's a non-current LLT. So non-currency is a very important part of your output. So let's say I'm interested in these 4. I can go up to here and say, export my selection to a spreadsheet. And it's going to come out in an Excel format. If you open it up in my Excel, I can save it, I can share it, I can edit it, I can discuss it with my colleagues. And every single one of these red deltas gives me kind of a short synopsis or description of what the output is. So in my first tab, it's going to tell me that I compared my 26.1 to 27, that I opted to include secondary SOC information, and here's a total rundown of all the changes, but it's only giving me the tabs that I selected. So it's going to give me the new PTs in Excel, the promotions, the demotions, and the currency changes. And with the new PTs, of course, it's giving me both primary SOCs as well as secondary SOCs, because I asked the tool to do that. Okay, that's the first function. Let me go back to MVAT Home, and let me now show you one of the most important uses of MVAT2 is the data impact report. If you have your own data and you want to see what impact the change in version of MedDRA was on your own data, can you do that? Yes, you can. You can also specify the language and the versions. So let's say I know I'm starting, my data was coded to 23.1, and I'm thinking of upversioning to 27, and I want to check out what impact this change in version has on my own data. I click next, and this will ask me to submit my information. What is the data you're looking at? I want to show you what my data looks like before I run it. It's a very simple Excel. And let me just open it up and show you what it looks like. All I need are 3 columns. These 3 columns, the order is very important. The first column is optional. It's going to be my identifier column. Do I have subject IDs? Do I have row IDs? Do I have any kind of identifier for my data that I can put in? If I don't, that's okay. I can even leave it blank, but I got to keep the order of the columns, because the tool will retrieve the terms from column B. And column B will be my coded data, whether it's an LLT level or PT level. And if I don't know, it doesn't really matter. The tool will still be able to run. The third column is my numeric codes. The third column is not required if you're using English. So if I'm running my MVAT analysis in English language, I don't need to provide both B and C. I can just provide either B or C or both of them. If I'm using a language other than English, I have to at least provide the codes, because the codes are unique. You know, in English language, we have anemia with an E and anemia with an AE. When you translate that into French or Spanish or Korean, you're not going to have that level of nuance. So you're going to end up with the same term in that other language. So that's why the numeric codes are unique, but the terms may not be unique in other languages other than English. So if I'm running this tool in a language other than English, I have to at least provide the code or both of them, B and C. So it's a really simple report. If I have a lot more information following my column C, it doesn't matter. The tool is only going to look at the first 3. And I need to make sure that my Excel is closed before I run it. So here we are at the tool. This gives you the same instruction that I just told you. And it also gives you a bit more detail that you're limited to 100,000 rows. So let me choose my file. Let me go to my file. This is my MVAT demo file. I'm going to double click on it and click next. Now, what the tool now does, it validates that the data I'm giving it is in fact MedDRA terms, either at the LLT level or at the PT level. If I made a mistake and some of them were either misspelled or I made a wrong code to one of them, the tool is going to tell me how many of the rows it could not validate, and it will still analyze the rest of them. So the tool that's giving me this basic output is telling me I started with 23.1, I ended with 27, I opted to include secondary SOC information, and there's about an 8% impact on my data. This column here still shows me the total differences between those two versions, so 23.1 to 27. That's why there's a lot of numbers in this column. Don't be alarmed. But this is the column I'm interested in, impact on the uploaded data. There's not a lot of changes. There's maybe one here where the LLT moved under a different PT, so it was under vaccination complication in 23.1, and now it's under immunization reaction. There's another change here where there was a SOC change. A link was added to this particular preferred term, so now we have injury added to this preferred term, but not as a primary SOC. And there's a couple here with hierarchy changes. So I have hierarchy changes for example, amoebic skin ulceration in 23.1 was under skin, and it's still under skin in version 27. It's skin ulceration. But there was a minor change here in the HLGT term where the acronym NEC was added. So there was a minor change here. In other examples, same NEC, but here, for example, the HLGT name was a little bit expanded between the different versions or changed. So this one here for brain herniation is an example of a change in the HLGT itself. Okay, some of them are called comprehensive LLT changes. So I might look at this and say, man, does this mean there's a lot of changes here? Not necessarily. Comprehensive LLT changes, let's see what it means. So let me go to the data impact report explanation, and I'm looking at report 55. So under report 55, which is here, basically it says that there could have been a change for an LLT on your list by moving it from one PT to another. Or the change wasn't from your list, but there was a PT on your list that had another LLT that's not on your list, but that LLT changed. So those are comprehensive changes. So just because you see a large number there, doesn't mean that there was a major impact to your data that you imported. So it's really useful to you to take a look at this summary. Can I export this into Excel? Yes, you can. You can also default all, or you can pick the ones you choose, and you can export your selection to this spreadsheet. And remember, if you don't export it, it's going to go away. So the tool will not save the data. And again, when I open it up, I'm going to see the same Excel sheet with the same, there we go again. So the same Excel sheet with the same summary. This tells me which version I started with, which one I ended with, whether or not I opted for secondary SOC information, the date that I ran it, how many rows I added to the tool, and how many it was able to validate, and the percentage of change. And of course, each tab will have the details. So if there's no output, it will be blank, and if there's any output, it will show it. So it's really very useful. I do encourage you to try it out, and you can run it no matter what team you belong to, as long as you have your MedDRA credentials. Okay, the last feature of the MVAT, let me go back to MVAT Home, is the search term change. Search term change is for single terms. You can run it on different languages in MedDRA, and you can use roots, but if you use the roots without the percentile sign, it won't work. So for example, let me show you nasal discharge. If I click NASDISCH, it's not going to recognize that. The tool in this particular case needs the percentile, the wildcards. So let me do it again with wildcards and run it. Or you can put the entire term in there and run it. And it's going to show me every single term in MedDRA that has these roots in it. So nasal discharge discoloration, nasal sinus discharge, and I can view the history for any of them. If I click on view change history, it might take a bit of time to show me, but eventually at the bottom, it will tell me where it started and where it ended up. So this was added in version 5, and it's still there, and there hasn't been any changes. So if I say, let me see if I can find one that has changes. Okay, this one, the nasal discharge, is started in 2.1 as an LLT under the PT rhinorrhea, under the respiratory SOC. In version 4, and I don't know if the color is clear to you or not, but it's kind of reddish color under the HLT and HLGT. So there was a change in the HLT rather than nasal cavity disorders, NEC. Now it was renamed to nasal disorders, NEC, and the same for the HLGT. And then in version 6, it tells you there was a link change. So again, there was a change in the hierarchy. The HLT was changed from nasal disorders to upper respiratory tract signs and symptoms, but the same SOC. And then in version 20, there was a link change, and it was in the HLGT, but it's still there now under current placement. Okay, so that concludes our demo for MVAT. Hannah, maybe we want to give a 5-minute break now and resume at 12:07, at 12:11.
Perfect. I will share my screen with a timer so everyone knows when we will resume.
Thank you so much. We'll see you in 5 minutes, folks.
Suzanne, you are back to having the presenter role.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome back, guys. So we concluded with the MVAT demonstration. Have there been any questions, Hannah, on that?
No, no questions received yet.
Okay, so let's move on to how to use MedDRA in data retrieval, presentation, and analysis. We already mentioned that one of the easiest ways to start that is with the overview by the primary SOC. And we saw that MedDRA gives us languages in different translations. So the order of the SOCs in English is not the same as in French as in Korean. So there is an internationally agreed order of SOCs developed by the MedDRA Expert Working Group. And this is for consistency irrespective of the language or of the alphabet that's being used. Now, it's important that if you're working with different partners, especially partners in different areas of the world who have maybe a different primary language, to discuss with them which order of SOCs are you using when you're preparing the data for presentation. Some guidelines actually do use the internationally agreed order of SOCs, like, for example, under the EU Summary of Product Characteristics. And this international order is available on one of our documents. So let me show you where. So we said under how to use support documentation, the gray banner, the introductory guide to MedDRA. And if you scroll down a little bit, so this is the order of the SOCs. This is in alphabetical English listing. And this is the order of the SOCs for the internationally agreed upon listing. So if you need that information, it is available to you there. It's also available in our ASCII files. So going back to our slides, we also gave an idea of the benefit of using the MedDRA grouping terms like the HLTs and the HLGTs when you're doing your primary overview of your data. And you can review your data either by line listings or tables or graphs. Now, the benefit of using just the primary SOC is that the PTs will be displayed only one time. So you won't see kind of an overrepresentation or an overcounting of events. But remember that cardiac neuropathy, you might miss groupings of areas that are of interest to you if you don't include your secondary system organ class. But let me start by showing you an example of where you would start. If your line listings are too lengthy because you have a large list of events or a very large database, one of the easiest things you can start with is a graphical display. So just look at it by system organ class, and you can sort it either by alphabetical or by international standards or however your preference is. And just by the graph, you can take a very quick look and say, I see something under here, the psychiatric disorder. So this is an easy way to start you off on identifying where your signal may be. Other system organ classes that you may want to take a closer look, your nervous system disorder, your GI disorder, your general disorder, for example. I want to take a look at all of them. So once you pick your system organ class, maybe then you can take a look at it with those groupings provided to you. So you can reach out to your programmer and say, hey, I'm interested in the nervous system disorder. Can you run it to me with the grouping terms, the HLTs and the HLGTs? And just looking at that will give you even a more focused idea of where your issue may be, where your signal may be, where you want to be taking a closer look at those subjects. You may just want to take a look at tremors, or you may decide that, well, I want these 5 cases are under movement disorders. So this is the grouping I'm interested in, this HLGT. So when do you switch to focused searches? Focused searches is once you identify the edge of that thread. So your general overview was maybe it's a brand new product. It's the first time you look at your data. Your focused searches is now you have the edge of that thread. You know where you're starting, either because you're working with a specific type of product with a certain class effect, or you have earlier maybe animal toxicology results, or earlier safety studies that you already have an area of interest. That's when you can use focus searches. And that's where your secondary system organ class would really be helpful. It may need a bit of programming from your programmers if you don't have the ability to view it as part of your output, but it will give you a more comprehensive view of events that are medically related. Of course, one thing to bear in mind, if you're looking at system organ classes, you're going to see the same event listed more than once, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that your number of incidents or reports has gone up drastically. It just means you're looking at more than one system organ class for the same event. This also allows you to group your terms still with the HLTs and HLGTs, even in your secondary view. Other ways you can do your focus searches, which is outside of the scope of today, is the SMQs and customized searches. And like we said, we're going to take a look at them hopefully in the next webinar. Okay, here's an example of how you do focus searches. So if you're a medical monitor or if you're a safety reviewer and you started to be concerned about seeing autoimmune diseases in your data, and you want to know how many of my cases so far are autoimmune diseases. Are you able to get that information on your own through MedDRA, or do you need a programmer? Or maybe you are a programmer and the medical monitor asked you to find that information out. So let's say you have 49 or 50 cases so far, and for some reason there's a concern about autoimmune diseases. Can we identify how many total autoimmune diseases we have in our data set? So you ran it by system organ class, and within each system organ class, you ran it by your PT. That's all you have. So looking at them, you may be starting to think, well, if the term has autoimmune in it, it's got to be an autoimmune disease regardless of the system organ class. So you have autoimmune neutropenia, which is fine, but you're not sure what Evans syndrome is under this blood and lymphatic disorder. Is it autoimmune? Do you have to go and Google it, or maybe ask a physician on your team, or maybe seek a validated medical reference? You move on to cardiac, it's the same thing. So you're not 100% sure out of all of these, can you give a very correct answer as to how many autoimmune diseases are there? You keep moving on, maybe it's under the immune system disorders, but there's only one preferred term under the autoimmune, under the immune system disorders. Okay, so is there a way to do this in MedDRA? Yes, there is. And let me walk you through this new tool. So I hope many of you are familiar with our browsers. There are 3 MedDRA browsers that are available to you. All of them are available to you if you have the credentials. There's the MedDRA desktop browser, the web-based browser, which we'll demo now, and then the mobile browser. The desktop browser, you can download it to your desktop from our website. And once you have it, it's already built with all the functionalities of the browser, but it doesn't have the MedDRA files. So it doesn't have the MedDRA version 27, 26, 25, etc. And it doesn't have them in the different languages. So it's kind of like an empty vessel. It's ready for you to be used, but you need to download the files that you're interested in. The advantage is that once you have them, you can work offline. You don't need to be connected to the internet to be able to use it. But remember, please, that we can't access it on your desktop. So every time we release a version, you need to grab those files and upload them to the desktop browser. The web-based browser is web-based. It's on the internet, so it's always updated with all the information as we have it, even the supplemental data. The mobile browser is a URL. It's not an app. So you don't need to download it as an app. It's a URL, but it's designed with a large interface to allow easy access and easy view. All of them require MedDRA ID and password. They all allow you to search MedDRA and the SMQs. They all provide support for all different MedDRA languages and allow you to change the language of interface. And other than the mobile browser, the 2 other browsers, the web-based and the desktop, allow you to export your search results and use your search bin. The web-based browser, another nice feature about the web-based browser is that it shows you supplemental files. So if you have changes in the next release that haven't yet been released, you can see them on the web-based browser and everything turns pink. And both the web-based and the desktop allow you to view primary and secondary link information. They allow you to upload your data into the browser and run it against SMQs, which is something we will demo you in the SMQ webinar. and allow you to use the advanced search Boolean options like not or. So here's our list again. So this is the list of terms that we have in our database, the ones that we're interested to know how many of these are autoimmune diseases. And like with the header of the slide, it gives you a clue that you're going to need to look at the secondary SOC to identify them. So let's see what they look like in the browser. Okay, the first way is, where do I access the browser? So there's a nice quick link up on the right-hand side for WBB, or under how to use tools, and there's our browsers, and there's, of course, where to download the desktop browser or to access the web-based browser. So let me just take you to the web-based browser. The same temporary credentials will allow you to access the browser, and let's log in. Okay, so we had anemia. So if I look up anemia and I look up the preferred term, I could either expand anemia to see how many system organ classes it links to, or just click on anemia, and on the right-hand side, it will show me how many system organ classes it links to. So right now, looking at it, anemia, there's no link to the immune disorders. There's no autoimmune disease here. Okay, what about the next one? What about Evans syndrome? Okay, so I click on Evans syndrome and I expand it, or I just click on it and look at the right-hand side, and I see right away that there is a secondary SOC for Evans syndrome under the immune system disorders. So the HLGT is autoimmune disorders. So, okay, Evans is an autoimmune disease. I can also export this Evans syndrome. So I can just click export for my search results, and my export tool will ask me, do you want to include secondary SOC information? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to want it. It's defaulted. And if I export that, it's going to give me a nice Excel sheet, and I can filter by the Excel sheet looking for that HLGT of autoimmune disorders. Okay. So here's my output. So if I filter by editing and filter, okay, if I filter, I can look for the autoimmune disorders. But it's really not very practical to do this one at a time. So another way that we can do this is if I right-click this Evans syndrome and I add it to my research bin. So you see here, I have the option to add to my research bin. I'm just right-clicking Evans syndrome and I add to my research bin. So now my research bin is ready for me. I'm going to add a name, autoimmune disorders, and I'm going to start adding different things. So I have my Evans syndrome. What was another term there? I have bird retinopathy, birdshot chorioretinopathy. So I'm going to right-click on the PT and add it to my research bin. It's next to my Evans, and I can keep going. So I can add arthritis. It was on my list. And I can find the PT, right-click, add to my research bin, and I can export my research bin. But this is, and it will be the same thing as my, I can export it to my research bin. So let me just show you before we move on to the third option, which is the easiest one. So we can do it one at a time, just looking in MedDRA. We can export one at a time. We can add each of them to a research bin and then export one shot with the research bin. And this might be useful if I have a small set of data. Here's my autoimmune. So right now I identified two, Evans syndrome and the birdshot chorioretinopathy. But this is also not efficient. So does the tool allow me to look at all of them at one shot? There is a tool for that. So let me just store defaults. This is my web-based browser. On the top right-hand corner, I have a tool called hierarchy analysis. This is a very neat tool. So it's a lovely, lovely tool. This tool allows you to import your data, kind of similar to the MVAT. It also allows you to pick what language you're using in MedDRA and which version of MedDRA your data is in. So very important right off the bat. Before you import any of your data into the tool, make sure you know which MedDRA version your data was coded to. Otherwise, the tool is not going to be able to give you an accurate output. Let's say my data is in 27, it's the most recent. I definitely want to keep this defaulted. I definitely want the secondary SOC information with the HLGTs and the HLTs. I even want the codes because I'm going to share this with my programmer later. And I'm going to import my data. So it's the same setup as the one we used for MVAD. It's just 3 columns. If you have more than that, that's fine. But the first 3 columns are the most important. The first column is your ID column. It's optional. And I'll show you now the difference between when you use it and when you don't use it. The middle column is either your LLTs or your PTs. If you're not sure whether your data is in LLT or PT, it doesn't matter. The tool will still be able to function. And the third is the code, just like the MVAD. The limit is 100,000. Let me choose my file. I'm going to choose the file that doesn't have the subject IDs. I'm going to choose the file without subject IDs just to show you what it looks like. And I'm going to click Next. So I added all my preferred terms that I have in my database because I want to know which one of them is an autoimmune disease. I'm going to open my file. Here's my output. And again, I'm going to filter by my HLGT, looking for autoimmune disorders. When I filter by my autoimmune disorders, there's 11 of them. So out of my, 23, 24 preferred terms that I have in my database, 11 of them are autoimmune disorders because they have a secondary link to this HLGT, or I can filter by my system organ class, immune system disorders, right? And look at this, look at the column that says, is this primary SOC or secondary? Only one of them was a primary link to the immune system disorders. So if I ignore my secondary system organ classes, I'm losing out on this cluster, this very nice, very clear cluster. So I know now that there's 11 PTs in my database that are autoimmune diseases. The question was, how many cases do we have? Well, there's a couple of ways I can find out that information. I can go to each one of these preferred terms and multiply it by how many times it's repeating in my database. So if I had 5 of these autoimmune neutropenia, I know I have 5 cases of this one maybe Evans syndrome, maybe I have 2 autoimmune myocarditis, and I can keep multiplying and adding, or I can run them against my data with the subject identifiers. So let me show you what that report looks like. I ran it against the Excel sheet of my data, but without the subject identifiers. This time, I'm going to run it with the subject IDs. So this is, of course, mock data. I have my subject IDs. So it's no longer 23 rows because now I have my subject IDs. It's actually 50 rows, 49 rows or so. And of course, some of the PTs are duplicated. So I see anemia for subject A1 and anemia for subject A5, which is fine, but I have my subject identifiers. Let me run the tool, the same tool, against this report with my subject IDs. Let me see what it looks like. And remember, you have to have the report closed. Okay, so let me choose a second file. Let me choose it now with my subject ID and click Next. And now I have a new output. Let me take a look at this output. This time, the tool used the output I gave it. Now, every time I run the tool repeats the information I gave it in the first 3 rows. Here's my subject IDs in the first column. Sorry, the first 3 columns. So here's my subject ID in the first column, my term in the second column, and the code that I put in my third column. Like I said, the codes are optional if you're doing this in English. Now, the tool gave me the PT level, the HLT level, the HLGT level, and the system organ class, whether it's primary or secondary. So let me filter now. Again, looking for that HLGT of autoimmune disorders. So let me look at autoimmune disorders. There's more than 11 now. And why is that? There's more than 11 because now I have my subject identifiers. And if I look at the bottom, it says 30 out of the 82 records. And the 82 records is because I have the secondary system organ classes. It doesn't mean I have more adverse events now. I only have the 50 adverse events, but I have 82 records because I'm looking at secondary system organ classes. Out of those, all of them, 30 subjects. I have 30 subjects in my database out of 50 who have autoimmune diseases. This is a huge signal. And if I didn't use my secondary system organ class, I would have missed the signal. But I want to show you even something else. If I sort out my output, if I sort it out and I decide I'm going to sort it out by my HLGT, are there other clusters? Now that I know the secondary system organ class can help me find clusters, are there other clusters? So the biggest cluster by far is my autoimmune disorder, but I'm starting to see other groupings, and it's up to me and my team to decide if they are significant and if they need a deeper dive. I mean, I'm seeing anemias. If I scroll down, I'm seeing endocrine. Well, no, not too much. It's only 2. But here's hepatic disorders. If I scroll down, there's myocardial disorders. This seems to be another grouping. And they're not all the same preferred term, but they're all myocardial disorders. What about ocular? There's a smaller grouping. And there's a white blood cell disorder, smaller grouping. So this is a really nice tool. I mean, the hierarchy analysis is a really, really awesome tool. It's easy to use. I do advise you to test it out and experiment with it because it really gives you very significant information when you're doing your data analysis and when you're trying to identify signals. Okay, let me go back to the slides. So we took a look at the different approaches. We started with individual terms, right? We're looking at each one and exporting each one. We said that's not very efficient, but it's available to you if you have a small number of data. We also use the research bin. We put in each one, and then we added that to my research bin, and I only exported the research bin. But the one that we found was really helpful is the hierarchy analysis tool. It allowed me to import my data, and of course, it's not going to save my data, and allowed me to export my data and filter, just filter with whatever filter that I was interested in, or sort the whole output and look for other clusters. And I was able to answer that question and say that out of my 50 subjects, 30 of them had autoimmune diseases. So Hannah, any question on this?
I am still not seeing any questions in the chat. Oh, one just came in. Perfect. Would the hierarchy tool be an accepted tool by regulators to detect and present signals?
So that's a very good question. Thank you for raising that. When you are presenting to the regulatory authorities, the expectation is that you are presenting by primary SOC. So you said presenting, right? Your presentation is by primary SOC. Your analysis can be by secondary SOC. So as long as you document what you did, and as long as you maybe have a conversation with them to make sure what their expectation is, but most regulatory authorities, their expectation is that your presentation is by primary SOC, but you can do analysis by secondary SOC. And let me tell you something, the regulators, they know these tools, and many of them use these tools also. So they are also evaluating your data for signals. And if you don't do the analysis on your own, they may be the ones to find it. So if you have these hidden signals in your data and you don't find it, the regulator may be the one to find it. So I hope that answered your question. Any other questions, Hannah?
That is it for the moment.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk about how you can develop your own queries using MedDRA, right? But before we start again with the polls, I just want to see whether or not have you had experience building queries in MedDRA? Is this something you've done before? Yes, I'm glad to see yes, maybe less than 2 years, but yes, some folks have no experience in building queries in MedDRA, but don't be alarmed. It's really easy. Once you get the hang of it, it's going to be super, super fun. I see experienced users, and I'm so glad to see folks who have experience. I do ask that if we present anything that you disagree with, or if you have maybe words of advice to the attendees and you'd like to post them in the chat, please do so. I mean, we welcome folks' input, but most folks have no experience in query building. Okay, another question is, data reporting and analysis is typically performed at which MedDRA level? So remember, we said data coding is done at the LLT. When you're reporting, when you're analyzing, it's a different matter, right? The LLT is the most numerous. There's 87,000. The LLTs, it will give you the ability to code properly. But when you're reporting to your partners, to your safety physicians, to your colleagues, to the regulatory authorities, it is the PT level, the preferred term, that is of interest. So it's not common to do reporting at the LLT level. When you are reporting, it's usually at the preferred term, and you can include the primary SOC, like we said, right? But the preferred term is a very important level in MedDRA when you're reporting and when you're analyzing. What about when you're query building? When you're query building, when you're building your query, which level of MedDRA do you think that will be the one that you need when you're building your query? Just bear in mind that when you're building your query, you need it for analysis, right? When you're building your query, you're going to use it for analysis. So when you start thinking analysis, when you start thinking signaling, when you start thinking aggregation, you're thinking preferred term. You don't want the whole sea of MedDRA. You don't want the 87,000 terms. Many of them are sister terms. They mean the same thing. They're there to help you code. But when you're building a query, your intent of the query is analysis. So that is best served with the preferred term. Okay, so when you're building a query, please remember that the level you're interested in is always going to be the preferred term. Okay, let's get started with query building, and hopefully we'll have time to do a hands-on example. So a query is basically a group of terms in MedDRA that are related to each other. They can be at the PT level, they can be at the LLT level. You use them to compare against your data and look for hits. Your first step, creating a query, is always your definition. What is the area of interest to you? How are you defining it? And this is where you need a group of people together. One person cannot do this step. It has to be cross-functional. You have to have folks with a medical background who understand the product, who understand previous safety concerns with the product, and you have to develop an inclusion-exclusion criteria. Remember that when you're building the query, leverage some of the grouping already done in MedDRA for you. Those HLTs, those HLGTs are there for you. Can you leverage them? They already grouped similar terms together, right? So can you leverage them? Like that autoimmune disorder HLGT. Don't forget the uniaxial system organ classes, your investigations, your surgeries, and your social circumstances. Don't forget those. There are other system organ classes you may be interested in, like the injuries, like the product issues. Maybe you're interested in general system organ class, so don't forget those. You can search neighbors, and I'll show you how to do that when we start looking in MedDRA for building a query. Look for surrounding events. So remember when we said arrhythmias, for example, there's different types of arrhythmias. Are you interested in all of them? Those are surrounding events. They are related to each other, but they're not necessarily the same concept. And one of the tips for building a query is avoid the LLTs. The LLTs are giving you a lot of details that you may not need when you're doing your analysis because they really mean the same thing, right? So LLTs are siblings. They are equivalent terms. They are not unique medical concepts. There are few exceptions where the LLTs would be of interest to you, The most common ones is infections, because the LLTs will drill down to the species, but the pathogen is already at the PT level. But if that's something of interest to you, then start thinking about building the query at the LLT level. Always remember that when you're building the query, it's important to document what you did, how you built it, how you're storing it, so that you can answer questions from regulators or from other stakeholders. You can train new people, or you can maintain it even if the person who built it leaves the team. And of course, always review it for impact once there's a new MedDRA version release. If you use the PT in a query, and that PT in the next MedDRA version was demoted to an LLT, then you have to figure out what you're doing with that place in the query. Okay, so just as a quick example on building a query, if I'm building a query on cardiac arrhythmia, do I have a grouping term already in MedDRA? Yes, I have a cardiac arrhythmia. So that is already there for me, and I can use that and drill down and capture all the HLGTs that are within it. Let me show you what we mean. So let's say cardiac arrhythmia. Remember, there's no percentile signs in this search. It's only in the MVAT. So it's going to pull up everything that has cardiac arrhythmia at the LLT level, at the HLT level, and at the HLGT level. So I already know there's a cardiac arrhythmia. And this has a lot of PTs in it. If I click on cardiac arrhythmia, it tells me which system organ class it's in. If I right-click and tell the tool, take me to this HLGT in the browser, it's going to show me under the system organ class hierarchy where this HLGT is. I can expand it, can look at all the different PTs within each high-level term grouping that's subsumed under this HLGT level. But if I want to build it, I don't want to copy every single one of these to an Excel sheet. There's an easier way to do it. Let me just first, I want to see my research bin. There's stuff in it. I'm going to clear all, and I'm going to start a new research bin. I'm going to right click, and if I just add that HLGT, it's not going to be helpful to me. Look what happens if I add that HLGT. It thinks I want to add the HLGT itself to my research bin. That's not what I want to do. I want to clear it. I want to add the PTs that are inside this HLGT to my research bin. So I'm going to right click and add selected levels to my research bin. It's going to ask me which levels. Well, I'm building a query, so I know that I need the PT level. And if I click next, look at how many PTs with that one click I was able to pull over into my research bin that I know I can export as an Excel sheet and discuss with my safety physician, whether he agrees with all of them or not. So awesome. What else can I do? I can do, this is called a top down because you're starting with higher level terms and going down. I can do a down up. So going back to cardiac arrhythmia, this is my LLT output. If any of these LLTs are of interest to me, I can look at the PTs, right? Which are the PTs that are related to these. And let's say I have arrhythmia already in here. Let's say this one I don't have and I'm interested in it. I can right click it and add it to my research bin. So now I did a top down and grabbed a whole bunch of terms from a grouping term already in MedDRA. I leveraged that, but I also did a bottom up. So other things that we said, don't forget. Let me just show you. So don't forget those uniaxial terms. Again, they are the investigations, because there are cardiac investigations I might be interested in, right? So for example, ECG investigations here. There may be stuff in here that I'm interested in. I can right click and take it, or take the whole HLT. Again, with selected levels, and say I want the PT, just add the whole bunch. Sorry, it does that sometimes. So let me just close that and see. Okay, so for whatever reason, I'm getting an error here, but that's okay. I can repeat my research bin, but that's just to show you an example of how you can investigate what other terms that are of interest to you as you're building your research bin. So don't forget your investigations, Don't forget your surgeries, looking for cardiac procedures that are of interest to me. And don't forget your social circumstances. So under social circumstances, like we said, are some risk factors that can be of significance to my area of interest. So if I'm looking at disabilities, maybe the person already uses a heart device. Okay, so going back to my slides. So we said look in investigations, look in surgeries, and also check with your physicians, check with your medical team. What are the signs and symptoms that are relevant to this area of interest? So maybe it's being reported as a sign or symptom. Maybe it's not being reported as a diagnosis. So maybe I'm going to have a couple of subjects that are reporting palpitations or chest pain or dizziness or shortness of breath rather than cardiac arrhythmias. Are they of interest to me? So there are different groupings that I can go to and check these out and see if they are of interest to me. And of course, the general system organ class. The general system organ class has fatal conditions in it because death can come from a multitude of reasons. So how can you link death to one particular system organ class? You'll find it under general SOC. So under general SOC, you're going to see fatal outcomes. And if you expand that, there's your HLT for death and sudden death. And some of these may be of interest to you because some patients present with a cardiac death as their first presentation of an arrhythmia disorder. So that's also something of interest. So don't forget the general system organ class. When your physician does a review of the cases to identify cases of interest on cardiac arrhythmias, they're going to be picking cases from different system organ classes anyway. So this is a normal process for creating a query. So there's your general disorders. There's your sudden death that was picked as a potential case by the medical reviewer. There's your investigations, the respiratory SOC, because that's the primary site of manifestation for dyspnea. There's your cardiac disorders expected for cardiac arrhythmias, but there's your nervous system disorder because it's the primary manifestation for syncope. And there's your surgical as a primary manifestation, the primary system organ class for your cardioversion surgery, and even congenital, like the long QT syndrome congenital, preferred term is under this system organ class. So maybe that also needs to be something you take a look at. And of course, social circumstances, your risk factors. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a hands-on exercise to build our own query. So here is the area of interest. It is cardiac failure. So what we're going to be doing is building a query through the web-based browser on cardiac failure. And what I need from you to do is think of the terms that you want to include in this query. So what are the medical terms that you think would be relevant to a query of cardiac failure? Whether it's a diagnosis term, whether it's a presenting sign or symptom, whether it's an investigation result that you think would be relevant, whether it's a surgery that you think would indicate that there's a cardiac failure. So basically what we're doing is we're setting up the definitions. So we're starting up. We are all a group of us together. We're a cross-functional team. And I want you to put into the chat feature the terms that you think are relevant. And what Hannah will do is she's going to say them out to me. She's going to speak them out to me. And I'm going to build the query through the search bin as we go along. But I just want to restart my MedDRA browser just in case there was an issue with the search bin. So think about what kind of terms would be of interest to you if you are building a query related to heart failure. I'm going to start us off by saying, is there already a grouping term for heart failure or cardiac failure? So remember, I'm going to be interested in the highest grouping term under the SOC, which is the HLGT. If I click on HLGT, I already see heart failures. Let me see where that lies. I'm going to go to the browser, and there's my heart failures. It has signs and symptoms, HLT. Okay, they're all good. I like these. There's heart failures not elsewhere classified. There's cirrhosis, failure, cardiogenic shock. I like these. There's a left ventricular failure. Okay, I like these. And there's a right ventricular failure. Okay, I like these. So let me add all of them in. So I already have a grouping term. I'm going to right click, add selected levels, and say I want the PTs. So here's my research bin. It's going to be heart failure. And I don't want secondary SOCs. I don't want HLTs and HLGTs. I just want this list. Okay. Anything else? Hannah, did we receive any suggestions?
Someone has suggested cardiac heart syncope.
Okay, so I'm not sure that that would all be in MedDRA, but there's cardiac syncope, there's cardiovascular syncope, and there's neurocardiogenic syncope. So these are all LLTs that are similar to each other, but they all link to the same preferred term. So all I really need is syncope. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to add it to my research bin. Thank you for that. What if there's, related terms to this? So I added it to my research bin, but let me take a look at the related terms. So if I right click on it, and instead of adding it to my bin, I go to browser. Let me go to browser with the syncope. I see syncope under nervous system as a primary system organ class because that's the primary site of manifestation. That's fine. I see it under vascular. What I'm building is a cardiac issue. So let me see it the way it's placed within the cardiac disorders. I want to double click it, show it to me under cardiac. And look at this. So I see it here under cardiac, and I see all the related signs and symptoms. It's under the HLT here, under the HLGT. I already have it, but that's okay. But that's a very good option. So you see, you already picked one that's been assigned in MedDRA within that grouping term. Anything else?
Nothing else yet.
Well, come on, guys. I mean, this is a cardiac disorder. There are so many other system organ classes that we haven't even looked at. Remember the 3 uniaxial ones. What about investigations? Can you give me an investigation that you think would be relevant?
We just got edema.
Okay, edema. I like edema.
Sorry if I pronounced this one wrong. Troponin.
So let me add this to my research bin. Okay, troponin. So standalone investigation is not something I'm interested in, right? I don't want just the fact that troponin was drawn. I want to know if it was abnormal. So maybe I'm interested in troponin I increased. Let me add that to my research bin. Maybe I want troponin T increased. Let me add that to my research bin. And just to make sure I'm not missing any, let me add the words increased next to my search result, and then I have them better displayed. So let me also take the just troponin increased, add to my research bin. Let me do the C increased, add to my research bin. And notice I'm doing it at the PT level. Anything else? What about surgeries? Are there any surgeries?
We just got ECG investigations.
So ECG investigations is an, okay, I see what you mean. You mean the ECG investigations as the HLT, right? So let me go to the browser. And just because I just had an issue with the HLT, I'm not going to add the HLT. I'm going to pick a couple of them. So I don't want electrocardiogram. That doesn't tell me anything. Electrocardiogram just says an ECG was done. And it's there because MedDRA is supposed to be used for coding investigations. But I want the abnormality. So maybe ECG abnormal. Okay, so maybe I like this one. I'm going to add that to my research bin. What about, for example, I don't want the normal output, but what about some of these? Let's say I want the ST segment abnormal. Let's see, I'm interested in this one. I'm going to add that to my research bin. What about surgeries, guys? Any surgeries that make you think that if a subject had this surgery, maybe that's a sign that there was a heart failure for that subject? Any surgeries that come to mind? Here's my cardiac surgeries.
We just got catheterization.
Okay, so let's put catheter. And because catheter can be in many different parts of the body, I'm interested in cardiac. So let me put catheterization as a surgical procedure. Arterial, cardiac.
Someone sent in broken heart syndrome, and then we also got valve replacement.
Okay. Okay, so catheterization, just to keep moving, I'm going to go with arterial just to make it quick. But of course, when you're doing it, you're going to be taking a closer look. So add to my research bin. And somebody said, what was it, Hannah, again?
We got broken heart syndrome as well as valve replacement.
Oh, let me clear my selection because I was on surgeries. So broken heart syndrome. Okay, I'm going to add it to my research bin at the PT level. Now, the broken heart is an LLT level, which is fine, but I don't want the LLT. I want the PT level. So I'm going to expand it and right-click on the PT, add to my research bin. And what was the last one? Sorry, Hannah.
Valve replacement. And then we also just got in HLT, arterial therapeutic procedures excluding aortic.
Okay, that's great, but just cognizant of time. So let me stop here. And just as a reminder, don't forget the social circumstances, right? If somebody has any risk factors that you're interested in, maybe you want to take a look at that. If they already are using any heart assistance devices, maybe that's a sign that they're a heart failure patient. But I have a pretty good amount. Let me export my research bin. Here's my research bin. So right there, you see this research bin? I already have a good number of preferred terms that we can sort through and then decide, yes, keep this, no, take that out. Just by going through MedDRA and asking ourselves these questions. Is there a grouping term already there? What are the system organ classes that designate the diagnosis I'm interested in versus the signs and symptoms? What are the investigations that can give me a hint? The surgeries that can give me a hint? Any risk factors, any social circumstances? Is the general SOC of interest to me? All these are questions that are very useful to you, and you have your own list of preferred terms. Now, just to kind of wrap it up, I'm going to show you an example of an output for heart failure. So let me just show you an output here. When your medical monitor is looking at heart failure queries and they're reviewing the data by the system organ class and then by the PT, they're also identifying cases regardless of the system organ class, just like we showed in the cardiac arrhythmia. Just taking a bit of time to open. I'm going to copy this list of PTs. I just want to show you something. We have this part of it does need programming assistance. So this is a macro that we built. It has the output by the medical monitor in these 3 columns already. So the medical monitor reviewed these cases based on the system organ class, kind of the same as they did for cardiac arrhythmia. They identified in green the ones that they're interested in, that this is a potential case based on the preferred term. Now, I created a query. You all help me now. Just create a query for preferred terms. If I copy and paste all these preferred terms that we identified in our query and I list them in this macro file that we created, it's going to tell me where we matched what the medical monitor identified, right? So the medical monitor already identified cardiac failure. We have it. Now, he identified dyspnea paroxysmal nocturnal. We didn't have it. But somebody mentioned dyspnea. So if we did a research a bit deeper on dyspnea, maybe we would have pulled up the dyspnea paroxysmal and the dyspnea paroxysmal nocturnal and included them, right? The medical monitor also identified congestive hepatopathy, and we did as well in our query. We both identified the edema peripheral. We both identified the core pulmonale, right? So you can see that now that it's very possible to build a query in your MedDRA browser on your own just by looking through the different levels of MedDRA, the different system organ classes. Okay, so I think we are a bit over time, so just let me wrap it up and say that MedDRA is well worth the effort to use in its tools. It's a powerful tool. It does require a bit of medical knowledge and MedDRA knowledge. So we went over the PTC guidance documents, the applications, the demos of the different tools, and we experimented with building our own query. What you see are a list of references available to you, and of course the links to our different training schedules and support documentation. So any questions, Hannah?
Wonderful. I am not seeing any new questions in the chat.
Okay, so I hope that you guys found this helpful. I do hope that you get the chance to test out the different tools, maybe when it's still fresh in your mind. You have access to the tools through your MedDRA username and ID credentials. If you don't know your MedDRA credentials, you can access them on our website. Just a quick look where that happens. So on the top right hand, under the quick links, under the SSA self-service application, if you don't have your credentials, you can submit a request to have them provided for you. So I hope you guys found this helpful. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time and your patience, and hope to catch you again on our next webinar. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our help desk, and I'll be happy to assist you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.